have, I've watched a lot of documentaries about Columbine. I've read many books, but I've got to say, your one, I like your book a lot because I feel like you bring Daniel to life. You don't talk about him like a victim, but you talk to him like a human being. Because at the end of the day, he was alive at one point. And I like that you really somehow go away a bit of, okay, this is what happened at Columbine. You actually tell us more about who he was from your own words and things like that. But from your what you said, what would possess people to do such a thing? That's what I've been, because some people think, oh, why would you read extensively about Columbine? The thing is, I was 17 the first time I was in Switzerland before coming to England, and I remember it was on the news, and I was watching this, and I remember I was Dylan's age, and I'm thinking to myself, these people are my age. I like to
Mm.
go to school, not having to worry, like just do my things and go home. And I was like, and I didn't understand English then, but I was like, why would you do such a thing? And I remember from the second decade, I mean, the first decade, I read a lot more about Columbine, and I read a lot about the motive because I was looking for the motive. Why would
Mm.
you do something like that? And apparently, they were bullied a lot, Eric and Dylan, and they hated the school. I feel like it's deeper than that. I think like psychologically there was something not right. I mean, what would you say about the motive? What would you say about the motivation for doing such a cruel and violent act?
You know, that's a really important question to address, especially because there was so much misunderstanding about that. A lot of people blamed it on bullying or they hated the school, but especially bullying. And I'm convinced that that was a very small factor in why this happened. Um, I mean, because you think you really have to be almost crazy to do something like this. And indeed, I do think that's what it was. I do believe that one of the shooters, Eric, um, was a psychopath,
Yeah.
very serious mental illness. He was being seen by a counselor, but the counselor didn't know that he was a psychopath. He didn't know it was this bad. And the other student kind of went along with him. He was very depressed and he was influenced by the one who was the psychopath. So I really think that it was serious mental illness primarily that was behind this.
Yes.
And it makes it a little bit easier to understand in a way because in that first year especially, I asked myself this question: why would they shoot Daniel? If indeed this was about bullying, Daniel would not have been someone who bullied them. He's not that kind of kid. So why Daniel? And I think the basic answer is it didn't matter who it was because those shooters wanted to kill as many kids as they could, which would include even their friends, their people that they knew.
Yeah.
Their bomb did not blow up. They intended to kill hundreds of students. So it didn't matter who they were. They just wanted to kill. And you have to be pretty sick to want to do that.
Yes, you have to. And also, have you met parents of the other victims? I mean, do you knew them prior to the shooting, or have you met them after the shootings?
We did not know any of the other parents, and we don't know if Daniel knew any of the other students very well. He didn't have a lot of friends. He was, like I said, he was a very shy kid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, after the tragedy, the parents did get together within just 2 or 3 months because we had a common purpose. The common purpose for us was we had heard that they were going to just fix up the library and reopen it. And we said 10 of our kids were killed in that library. You cannot reopen that library. You cannot ask students to go back into this place where 10 kids were killed
Yeah.
and others were injured. So that became a common goal for us. We worked together. even though we had different beliefs about the causes and different beliefs about guns, we had that one common goal, and that was to not let that library be reopened. We wanted a new library to replace it. So we did make connections with those other parents. We met frequently with them over this issue, and you also realize at that point nobody knows what you're going through like these other parents. This is somebody who knows what you're going through. So that was a really important connection for us for the first 5-10 years. We you know we got together with those other folks, and after about 10 years, we pretty much went our separate ways, and we really don't have much contact with them anymore.
Okay. So how about the teachers? Have they, I don't know, have they contacted you after what happened in Columbine? Have you stayed in touch, especially with Frank DeAngelis? Have you stayed in touch?
Not much with teachers. Of course, after Columbine, a number of teachers left Columbine. They didn't return. It was too difficult for them. Um, Frank DeAngelis, who was the principal, we've had contact with him over the years. In fact, he was a member of the church we were going to at that time.
Oh, what a lovely person. So I want to talk to you about your book. So how long after did you start writing this book? So after you process, I mean, it must have been a very difficult to process grief, especially, you know, we're all going through that, but especially your own child must have been really awful and difficult. But when did you start conceiving the idea to write a book about this?
I think a few years after Columbine is when I thought maybe I would write a book. Um, but frankly, uh, the two things kind of held me back. One was, well, I could write about what happened to Columbine, but what's the ending of this book? what, how do I kind of close it? And then second was that there was this big question in my mind: what about the parents of the shooters? Um, I had never met them. They really didn't make any contact with us except for one letter of apology of sorts. And I felt that was kind of something that was there and not resolved. And then in about 2009 or so, I wrote a letter to the parents of the two shooters. And within the next 1 or 2 years, I then met with the parents of the shooters. Once that happened, then I felt like, okay, now this is maybe a little bit closer to something like an ending to the story.
Mm-hmm.
So it was in 2012, 2011, I probably began. It was in 2012 I published the book because I felt like I'd reached the point where there was more of a story to tell. Because I didn't want it to be just about what happened at Columbine and immediately thereafter. I wanted it to be something that kind of showed, well, what happens to parents of victims like this over a period of years.
Yes, I liked that's why I mean, for me, I like that you took us from the beginning. You know, you sort of spoke, you know, about what's happened, but then I like the fact that you spoke about your own, you know, your own self, like where you come from, the type of person you are, the type of family you are. I like it's not just about Daniel. That makes sense. But you speak more. We get to know you a bit more because obviously you're the author. And as a reader, I like to say, oh, well, who's writing this book? What about this person? And I like your honesty, the way you spoke. I feel like you didn't help back. You really went like the grief, like the processing time. Because at one point you feel numb, like the world is going is everything's going on as normal, but you feel like you were stuck, like you didn't know what to do, how to feel. All these people being, you know, uh telling you like, I'm sorry about your loss, but you were like not processing. So you were talking about how what grief really is, because to be honest, we all know one day people will care about they're gonna pass away, but your son passed away in a very brutal way. I like the fact that you really didn't have back how you felt at that moment. Was it painful to go back and talk about your journey, grieving, and the controversy? Was it? It must have been really painful.
It was, but it was also it was kind of a chance to release and tell the world, because people don't know what tends to happen in in situations like this is a couple of things. Everybody is, offering their thoughts and their prayers and their condolences, and then they kind of want to get back to their life. And so much of the attention, unfortunately, is shown on the killers and not the victims and the victims' families. And also something that we experienced, and we've seen this in other mass shootings in America. There's this effort to what they often call strong. And here
Mm-hmm.
in Columbine, it was "We are Columbine." That was their way of saying we're strong. We're going to get through this. This is going to be okay. We'll work together. Okay, that's fine. And in other places, it's been usually they use the word strong. So if there's a mass shooting in Boston, it's we're Boston strong. And I understand the need for communities to want to get through a terrible tragedy, but I also am concerned that sometimes it's their way of saying, okay, let's move on. Let's forget this terrible thing that happened in our community. We're ashamed that it happened here, but we're strong and we're going to get through it. And it's almost, I fear, a way of saying, let's put this behind us. Let's hurry up and move on and not admit this terrible thing. And it kind of leaves the victims forgotten in a way.
Yes, I agree.
I
I
don't
mean,
think that sometimes our grief is acknowledged. And in fact, I mean, you do have some people saying, well, gee, are you over this yet? Have you moved on? Well, you don't move on from the death of a child. I mean, you simply don't. You do the best you can. You try to make the best of your life, and you try to honor your lost child. But no, you don't just simply move on and get over it. And I think that's what, unfortunately, some too many people try to do.
yes.
And if we say otherwise, we say, well, gee, we're still in grief. Like, well, gee, there must be something wrong with you.
Listen, there's no right or wrong way to grieve. I believe. I don't know, but I feel like no one should really tell you, "Oh, it's been a long time ago. Haven't you moved on already? Or why are you still dwelling on that?" There's no right or wrong way to grieve for a child,
Right.
especially for a child. I want to ask you. So, when you met the parents of Dylan and Eric, what did they say to you? Did they have any answers to appease your grief? Did they try to offer some answers?
Um, Not really. In the case of, I met with Dylan's mother, not his father. Father didn't want to do it. Um, and she felt very strongly that understood now that he suffered from depression, and her main thing was, I just really didn't realize that he was depressed like that. Um, and she's become kind of an advocate for um, dealing with depression more. In the case of Eric's parents, Eric was the one that shot Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when we met with them, and um, we didn't ask specific questions about that. We they had already been interviewed in a court process, and those records, unfortunately, are sealed. Nobody knows what happened in those interviews. But we knew that they were already asked questions, and nothing came out of it, and we kind of realized that they weren't going to share anything with us as to cause. Mainly, what we wanted to do was find out what kind of people they were and
Mm-hmm.
what home life was like. Did they eat together at the dinner table? What was their son like before this happened? What was family life like? So we just wanted to kind of get a feel for them as people. And, unfortunately, the reality is people don't want to hear this. We kind of went in thinking these must be terrible parents. And oh boy, what kind of home life did they have? But the shocking reality was they weren't that much different than other people. I don't think that they were connected enough with their son, certainly. Um, we don't think that they put enough value on keeping track of what was happening with their son and what was happening to him at school. Yeah, they were not real well tuned in, but it wasn't like it was a totally dysfunctional family. So it's a little bit scary in a way that this could happen in any household.
Yes, the one thing I want to say about you on that, because as I said, that was the same age as Dylan, but as a teen, look, when I was a teenager, I used to smoke cigarettes. I used to smoke other stuff. I'm not gonna go into much into that, but you can have a secret life.
Mm-hmm.
There's ways that your parents would never know your double life, if that makes sense. Because in front of my mom and in front of my teachers, I'll be one way, but behind that, when I'm not in school, when my mom was at work, then I have my little life going on. So, in respect of that, because people easily say, "Oh, I blame the parents. I blame the parents," but then again, and that's why I quote that from what Eric said. Good wombs. I think he said something along the lines of "good wombs bore bad sons." So I think what Dylan's trying to say himself is that his parents were actually good parents, but
Mm-hmm.
he made the choice to be bad. And for me, life is about choice. Because as much as the parents must have told him, you need to do this, you need to do that, told him right from wrong, he decided to do something else. And in many times in his journal, he even said he was boasting how easy it was to make good impression, and
Mm-hmm.
also how it was fooling people. So in respect to blaming the parents, I mean, no matter how sad that will happen, and I work with teenagers. I'm a teacher now. Teenagers, they have double lives. They will be one way, and then when you're not around them, they'll be another way. And sadly, that's for every teenagers are like that. I mean, I like the fact that you had some sort of closure, in terms of meeting with the parents, see what they were like. I mean, do you feel there's ever going to be a closure for you?
No, not really. I mean, Daniel won't be back. Um, it's when you've been through a tragedy like this. My wife and I often speak of how essentially we've had two lives. It was before Columbine and after Columbine.
Mm-hmm.
We measure things that way. We'll talk about something happening. Oh, was that before Columbine or after? That's just our life is kind of, and that's not to say that our lives are totally tragic and that we don't have fun anymore, or that oh, this is just the terrible life that I want to end. No, but it's a very different life. It's a very different life after Columbine. We've had to work hard at creating a new kind of life and find happiness in a different way. Um, but yeah, this is not really closure. But I'm not looking for closure. I'm looking to honor Daniel. I'm looking to try to always kind of have a better understanding of what happened. And yeah, I mean, Daniel won't be back. I hope to see him again someday, and I just have to live with it.
Yeah, so you also talk about activism. I like the fact that you were asking questions about, especially I think from what Daniel said, about gun laws, I think you were also searching for answers. Are you carrying that on? Are you still in activism? Are you still dealing with that? Or you feel like, you know what, this country policy is what it is, or you're looking for change?
No, I continue to look for change when it comes to our gun laws in particular, and issues like mental illness and isolation, things like that. Um, no, we have to change in this country because this problem is not going away. And for me, it's an important way that I honor Daniel by doing this work because I think this is what he would want me to do, and that I think that's one of the ways that you really have to um, go on with your life when you've lost a child in a situation like this. You have to say to yourself, would my child want me to be in perpetual grief and not able to move on with my life? No, Daniel would not want that. He would want me to move on, but I think he'd also want me to take into consideration what happened to him. So I feel for the other parents who were going through something like this, and I don't want to have more people going through the pain like this. So that's the way I honor Daniel, was by trying to be an activist, to try to change our laws, change our way of thinking, so that there won't be as many gun deaths.
I don't know how you're gonna feel about what I'm gonna say, but there's been a lot of school shooters that somehow always refer to Columbine, and I
Mm.
feel sometimes that Columbine has become a symbol of school shooting. How do you feel about that?
I feel terrible about it. I hear it all the time. They reference Columbine, and really, there isn't a lot of reason to do that, because in a number of those cases, again, it's kids who were bullied. This was not about bullying.
No.
Uh, I and I think it's because they want to reference Columbine because it's sort of it's seen as a revenge case, whether it's bullying or something else. But it was two students who were doing this. It was them getting back. They wanted to do a lot of harm to that school. So I can imagine that kids who were not happy with their school, or the kids around them, want to get some kind of revenge, and that's why they reference Columbine. It was a very high profile case with a lot of media attention.
Yes, sadly. But the one thing I would say is that from what I read as well, because I didn't just read about Columbine, what happened, but also the area, Colorado, that area, I don't know, maybe you can enlighten me on this, but I feel like Columbine is sort of in the middle of not a lot of things happening. It's around a very quiet places. So people think, oh, there's a lot of things going on. But actually, Columbine, when you look at it, it's in a nice located area, a lot of space, very quiet. It's
Mhm.
just unfortunate. I mean, for me personally, Columbine could have happened anywhere. I mean,
Yeah,
what do you
it could have happened anywhere. And I think one reason it had such an impact on America and the way we look at guns is precisely that reason. I think before that, it was, gun violence, especially among young people, was seen more as an inner city problem. You know, in the heavily populated uh, inner cities. And here was a case. It was in a quiet suburb of Denver, just an ordinary place, and it was two white kids. It was two kids. That was shocking for America too, because usually it's a lone shooter. Here it was two, and it wasn't just a moment of anger. They had been planning this for over a year. So those were things that were a real shock to Americans. Um, it really got their attention.
Yes, it did. And have you met Brooks' mom or Brooks' dad? Because they're the one who flagged this up. They basically have been speaking to the sheriff. I mean, as parents who are concerned, they did everything any parents would do when you hear things like that. So why wasn't it followed up? I mean, there was a school work talking a lot about violence. There was a lot of threats. There were a lot of evidence. Why was this allowed to happen? I mean, I'm not asking you for answers, but how come no one put a stop to
Well,
this?
I think that's the biggest question in all of this. Not so much what was the motive, but why wasn't it stopped? And we will never get that answer. I think that it was covered up. Um, and yes, I have spoken with Brooks' dad a number of times. In fact, he lives not too far from me, and once in a while we see each other walking in the neighborhood. Um, yeah, the warning signs were clearly there, and he told the police. They actually drafted a search warrant to go into their home, and then nothing was done about it. And I think that was really one of the biggest lessons from Columbine, that you have to follow up on these things. I think sometimes in America, there's this feeling of, again, especially in white middle class area, oh, let's not upset the apple cart, as they say. Let's not get people angry about going into their home with a search warrant. Well, maybe there isn't enough evidence here. Oh, I don't want to be accused of jumping to conclusions. But then as a result, they did nothing. They didn't follow up, and then they tried to cover it up, and then it became known, and all of a sudden, oh well, they didn't really address it. We don't know why they didn't go forward with it, and I think that gives the wrong message to kids. Because I think one of the biggest lessons from Columbine is, if you see something, say something. And what I say to young people is, I know it can be difficult if you see something or hear something that you think, "Ooh, this might be a problem. This kid might turn violent or might do something bad." If you don't say something, and something bad happens, do you want to live with that? um, if you don't say something, that you'll feel awful. If maybe you report something and it really wasn't the case, or they were just kidding about something, okay, fine. Someone's going to be mad at you. Okay. They're going to be mad at you. But isn't that better? Isn't it better to report something rather than not report it and then have that guilt that you could have stopped it and you failed to stop it? So if you see, and Brooks' dad did that, you know, and his son told him about it, obviously. So, and he was Brooks' son was, I mean, Brooks was a friend of the killers, and
Mm-hmm.
yet he reported this to his parents, and his parents followed up. It was the police that didn't follow up,
Yes.
and that's again that's a bad lesson, bad example being set by the police.
But also, I'm sorry to ask you this, but in for me during the shooting as well in the school, I feel like if the police broke the building, did everything, maybe some lives could have been saved. Because at one point they were, shooting towards the killers. They were trying to make it stop. But for me, my problem is, why didn't they go in the building sooner? Why waiting hours? Personally, I feel like lives could have been saved. Those that were shot, if the police would have come and then help would have come as well, a lot of lives could have been saved, especially Dave Sanders, one of the teachers, even the kids in the library. Why did they wait hours? We're not talking about 1 hour. We're talking, I think, 3, 4 hours they waited.
That's right. I don't think that if the police had gone in, they probably wouldn't have been able to save Daniel's life. I think that particular happening in the library was probably too early in this to be stopped. So I'm not going to say, oh, definitely Daniel could have been saved if they had gone in, but certainly in the case of teacher Dave Sanders, that his life, and we wouldn't have gone through the agony of having to wait a whole day to know whether Daniel was alive or dead. They told us that they weren't going into the building because there were possibly bombs that were set and they had to go in slowly. Um, but they knew the killers were inside. The shooters were inside the building. How could they not go in? And I think it was cowardly, frankly. I think that the sheriff um, didn't have his people go in, and it was a tragedy. A number of police officers wanted to go in, but they were told not to do so, and that was the leadership that told them not to go in. I think it was a big lesson that was learned again from this, that we now call it the active shooter. That when you have an active shooter, they're not taking hostages, they're shooting. And you have to do something about it, not stand outside and wait to get word from them about hostages. There was no indication of hostages in this case. So police since that time have been going into situations, and yes, it is a danger to the police, but that's what they that's the career they chose.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about children in a school, yes, those could be your children. Yes, you do go in and encounter that danger and try to save lives. And the fact that they stayed out was just atrocious, cowardly.
Yes, it was. I mean, I think I read Susan Klebold somewhere. She said that when she found out early on it was a son, she even said, "I wish the police could have got in there and make it stop. So even if that means to kill him, so even if the mom said that, you as a as that as you said, that's your career. You chose this career, risking your life to protect people. So I do, but the thing is, when you say lesson we learn, but we're talking fatal mistakes. We're talking life and death. We're not talking a little mistakes and okay, we learn from it. This is, I feel like they should have taken some responsibility. Did the police ever shoulder the full responsibility to what happened? I mean,
No.
Dylan and what they did, okay, that's on them as well. But I feel like the
Mm-hmm.
police should have taken some responsibility.
Yes. And part of the excuse that was given was that um, the standard operating procedure at that time was this thing of wait wait outside and negotiate with the shooters. That was the standard operating procedure. But even in wartime, there are standard operating procedures, but you have to react to the situation at hand. So I think it's really kind of a cowardly thing to say, well, the standard operating procedure was to wait outside and negotiate when you knew that they were shooting inside. You knew it. You had a 911 operator listening to the shooting inside the school. To say that you stand outside and that this is the right procedure, those kind of procedures are meant to be overridden based on the circumstances.
Yes, I totally agree. But honestly, Tom, I want to say a big thank you for your time. Thank you. And I know it's not easy to relieve all of this because sadly, it's Columbine. I feel like we are always going to hear about it, unfortunately. But I end my interview with, what would you say to young people to inspire them? But in your case, I would like to say, what would you say to young people that are facing, either depression, either mental illness, and also a tragic event that's happening? How do you recover for something like that? So it's three advice. So if you have depression, what would you advise them? If you have mental illness, what would you advise them? And if you ever come out of a tragedy like that, what would you say to people, young people?
I think the most important thing is don't be ashamed. If you were feeling bad, if you were feeling like something is wrong, or if you know of someone who's feeling wrong, that's feeling bad, you need to get help. Just as if you have a broken bone, you need to get help. Well, there are physical ailments and there are mental ailments. The brain is part of the body, just like the leg is part of the body. And if there's something wrong, it needs to be worked on. Don't be ashamed to get that. We have to overcome this stigma that, oh, there's something wrong with you if there's something wrong with your brain and it's not functioning right. No, it's just something wrong and it needs to be worked on. Don't feel ashamed, and don't be afraid to if you know of somebody who's having problems, talking to them about it openly, and to try to seek help. I
Yeah.
think especially as we become more isolated in our societies these days, um, as we become more isolated, there's even more reason and cause to get help.
Yes, and finally, if you were to leave, a tragedy, and then you come out of it, what would you say about advice to how to, the journey of grieving or the journey of healing? What would be your advice on that?
Again, I think the main thing would be, what would your loved one want you to do?
So
They want you to move on, and they want, I think they want us to not let it happen again, and we have to keep at it, to deal with these kinds of problems, and not just put our head in the sand and say, well, it's up to somebody else. No, it's not up to somebody else. It's up to you. And I think, especially for young people, I think they have to ask themselves, do you want to live like this? With school shootings, or in America, and I don't know if you go through this in the UK, of these active shooter drills. We're preparing for shootings. Do you want to live like this? If not, then you have to do something about it, and not look to somebody else to do it. You have to do something to change it.
yeah, so you had to change. Is that what you're saying? I mean, on the final note, in the UK, we have a lot. I don't know if you know this in America, but in the UK, we have a lot of knife crimes, and I think we can
Mm.
do a lot better. Such as, like in the airport when you check, because some kids have been in school with a knife and they get excluded. But for me, I feel like they need to get help. Because if you come to school with the intention, with a knife to kill someone, you need to get immediate help, because getting rid of that child from the school, it doesn't solve the problem. I feel
No,
like there's a that we need to do as well as a country. We need to find ways that, if it's possible to detect, metals, and also if somebody has like a knife on them, they need to get immediate help, because you don't know what they can do somewhere else. So I feel like, just like in America, in the UK, we have a lot of things to do too, so that we can stop violence amongst young people. I think that's what I would say. But I want to say thank you so, so much, Tom, for the constant, messaging and sorry, making this possible. And I know it's not easy to be always approached to talk about Daniel, but I like the way that you do this with such dignity, with such, you know, the memory of your son. I feel like it's always going to be there. And I'm sure Daniel is looking down at you. He must be proud of you, so that's amazing for a book that you really honor him and really share all of us the story of him as a person, not as a victim. So I want to say thank you so much for that. Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a lovely evening, or have a lovely day. I don't know what time it is for you, but
Hey,
have a lovely rest of the day and have a lovely weekend.
thanks, you too. Cheers.
Thank you.